Our next speaker is Stefan Slivinski. He's a principal engineer at Lifesize, a division of Logitech. Stefan spent the better part of his time at Lifesize running the video engineering team, which developed the video algorithms that went into all of Lifesize's hardware video conferencing endpoints and infrastructure. More recently, Stefan has been leading the expansion of the Lifesize cloud service offering. I'm traveling a lot from what we hear.
So thanks for staying. This is, I guess I'm the second to last topic before Alex goes, and so I'm impressed with the number of people that are left. So anyways, like Alex said, my name is Stefan Slivinski. Today I'm going to talk about video coding, current and next generation. We've heard a lot already about 265 and HEVC and a little bit of VP9. So I'm going to go in, kind of take this into two different sections. The first kind of 10 minutes I'll focus on at a high level video coding in the past and in the present. And then even for someone who's kind of made their career in video compression, this stuff is quite boring for even myself. So I'm going to go into a sort of a different topic of conversation that someone actually mentioned to me at a trade show quite a few years ago. And you probably heard this yourself if you've been in video coding, and in that at some point we're not going to need video compression, and this is going to be very soon. So next year, it's always very soon. So so first, video compression. I'm going to spend some time on this side of the room because everyone seems to be over there, and I feel bad for you guys. So there's two types of compression. These aren't specific to video, but there's lossless compression. This is your sort of zip file where all of the information that was compressed can be recovered afterwards. And so that's useful for zip files. The compression efficiency is not as good. And this is where lossy compression comes in. And this is not particularly useful for zip files, but it provides the ability to throw away some information. And so this can be useful for images and video, but it depends on the information that you actually throw away. And so figuring out what that information is and how to do it in a way that is not perceivable is really the kind of critical component of video compression. And the question sort of becomes, well, how do you know what information to not throw away? And this is where it comes down to the human visual system, your eye, what you're able to actually perceive. And so if we can exploit some of the limitations of the human eye, you can find some techniques or tricks to sort of improve compression efficiency. And so there's a couple kind of key facts that video compression touches on. The first being that we're not really able to perceive a lot of high details in images. And more so, high frequencies, we're more sensitive to lower frequencies than we are to higher frequencies. So if we can find a way to exploit that, we can throw away information that then ends up not being perceived by somebody. So the next one is we're more sensitive to light than we are to colors, and this is really everything to do with the ratio of rods to cones in our retinas. And the last one is this is not specifically used in the standards per se, but there are techniques that are used with video compression where we're not able to perceive, or not necessarily perceive, but fully comprehend more than 15 frames per second. And you're probably thinking, I can see more than 15 frames per second. And the reality is that you can notice there's something changing, but you can't necessarily perceive it. And so if I hold something up for 66 milliseconds, which is 15 frames per second, you'll probably be able to know what it is and recognize it. It's a shape or some sort. If I hold that same object up for 33 milliseconds, you may have a harder time. Maybe you can tell what it is. Maybe you're not entirely sure. If I hold it up for 16 milliseconds, which is 60 frames per second, there's probably very little chance that you're going to know what it is or recognize it. And the same holds true if I'm waving my hand at 15 frames per second. You're going to see that it looks very choppy. At 33 frames per second, it's probably a little bit smoother, but it's not quite right. And then at 60 frames per second, it's going to look pretty fluid. So there we go. So the other thing that is sort of a blasphemous statement to all the people that have invested hundreds of thousands of hours of research into video compression is that all standards from H.261 all the way to H.265 fundamentally work in the same way. Now, as processing power improves, the ability to spend more time in certain areas has really resulted in the improvements in compression efficiency. But essentially, there's spatial compression where you're compressing just a still image and not taking into account anything else, in frames in the past. There's temporal compression where you're looking in the past to use that information to predict the current frame. So if I'm waving my hand, for example, you can see the whole background is static. There's no reason to code that. So you're really trying to just code the difference. So use the information in the past to help minimize what you have to use in the current frame. So, and then the next is around the DCT or discrete cosine transform. This is really what, in conjunction with quantization, is how we exploit the human's eye's inability to perceive high frequencies. And so what this is able to do is take an image from the spatial domain and convert it to the frequency domain. And so what you end up is coefficients that are sorted in order of low frequency to high frequency. And so if you can quantize those coefficients or remove, which ends up removing the higher frequencies, you can do it in such a way, as long as you're not too aggressive with the quantization, where you can actually, it's very difficult to notice the difference between the two. And so this is really, the quantization is really the only lossy step within video compression. And then you have entropy coding, and this is the, Huffman is kind of one of these techniques where you're essentially information that appears more frequently is given smaller code words to represent it than information that occurs less frequently. So in the past, the kind of past codecs, or legacy codecs, if you want to call them, are H.261 all the way up to MPEG-4 Part 2. And again, very similar in terms of how they operate. They have this concept of macro blocks where an image is broken into 16 pixels wide by 16 pixels tall. And then you end up with spatial and temporal techniques, and then quantization and entropy coding. Now with 264, that again, very similar, but it added a whole bunch of other tools to really improve the compression efficiency. Multiple interprediction modes, which is using pixel values around the current macro block to kind of predict what that macro block looks like, so you can reduce the amount of information you actually have to send, and so thus improving the compression efficiency. And then you had a whole bunch of motion vectors, which really just gives you more granularity in terms of tracking motion. So when I'm waving my hand, you can have additional vectors that you don't have to represent with a larger block, for example. A couple different transform sizes, multiple block sizes that are not actually square, and so that, again, useful for temporal prediction. There was an in-loop deblocking filter. One of the side effects of quantization and the transform and throwing away higher frequencies is you end up with these what you call blocking artifacts, or kind of the image looks sort of not quite continuous or fluid. And so the blocking filter will remove these artifacts and make the image look nice and smooth. And then arithmetic encoding was another entropy coding technique, and then half-pel and quarter-pel interpolation, which again is used for temporal prediction. And so in the future, you end up with 265 or VP9. I don't know if we were allowed to say that in this forum, but so these are, again, we have very large block sizes up to 64 by 64, a whole bunch of different transform sizes. They removed the concept of macro blocks and came up with the coding tree unit. There was a huge investment in parallel processing techniques, which was a major limitation of 264, which made it very difficult to do independently coding the same parts of the same image on different processors because of dependencies between that, and one of them of which was the loop filter. And so 265's got a couple different techniques. Our last speaker mentioned one of them, the wavefront processing. And then there's some of the additional extensions in 265 give you bit depths that are greater than 10 bit, and then also subsampled chroma channel, which is just the color information. Okay, so that's kind of the high level of my 10-minute overview of video compression from past to present, and I glazed over pretty much everything, but it gives you kind of an appreciation for what's involved. The next question is this guy I saw at the trade show 5 years ago, or however long it was, and he said to me, pretty soon we're not going to need video compression. We're going to have so much bandwidth that it's just going to be irrelevant and a pointless activity. And I thought, well, that, I've been making my living for 15 years doing this. That's kind of, scary. That's a scary thought that we don't need compression anymore, and then I'll have to find a real job. So I thought, well, we can probably take a look at this and try to objectively answer that question. Is that even possible? Is that true? And so I thought, well, there's a couple different factors that kind of weigh into this. And the first being, how much resolution is enough? So we're up to 4K now, and there's talks of 8K. I mean, at what point does this end? Does it just keep going on forever? And so we need to think about that one. How much compression is enough? At some point with bandwidth and stuff like that, there's a point where compression just sort of becomes unnecessary. So, and then again, how much bandwidth enough? So a lot of these are sort of independent or dependent on each other. So we need to try to isolate one of them. And so I thought, let's start with resolution. Let's try to answer the question, how much resolution is enough? So the average human eye, talking about human eye limitations again, the average human eye can see roughly 300 pixels per inch at a distance of 12 inches. And so if you remember the iPhone 4 and the big thing they made out about the Retina display, well, the Retina display had a 326 pixels per inch on the iPhone 4. And so if we use, so they concluded that if you hold that iPhone at a distance of 12 inches, what is that, or like that, and you would not be able to distinguish any individual pixel. And so all edges would look very smooth and fluid, and that was the idea of a Retina display. So if we take that extension to a television, which is kind of one of the core components of your sort of living room, and so we say, okay, a 60-inch TV at 4K resolution, that's a fairly decent size for a living room at home. And certainly there's other applications like a theater, for example, or if you have a large home theater at home, you're going to want different sizes. But we'll just pick 60 for the sake of argument in my particular scenario here. And you say, well, that display, just by simple math, has roughly 73 pixels per inch. So that's not anywhere near the iPhone, but that's a decent number. So is that enough? Is that enough to be a Retina display? So, well, then you have to answer the question, how far are you away from that actual TV? And so, fortunately, THX has recommendations about viewing distances. And so THX says that a 60-inch TV, you should be roughly 6 to 9 feet away from that. So that's a reasonable distance. 6 feet is not terribly close. So let's assume 6 foot is kind of the worst case, because the closer you are, the more resolution you can see. So at 6 feet, the average human can resolve about 40 pixels per inch. So well below the 73 pixels per inch that you have on this 60-inch 4K TV. So if you actually wanted to get to the point where you can start seeing individual pixels, you'd need to sit about 39 inches away from that TV, which is a little bit further than my hand at this point. So that's a little close. I mean, my kids probably sit that close, but that's not, the normal person does that. So you can see we sort of hit a point where with 4K and 60 inches in this particular application where additional resolution, at least based on sort of the concept of a Retina TV, is not really adding a lot of value. So it's sort of hit that point of diminishing returns. So let's use 4K as our sort of example and try to answer the other two questions. And really they're fairly dependent on each other, so I'm kind of grouping them together in this case. But how much bandwidth and compression is enough? And so the first question you want to answer is, well, how much bandwidth is available? So we need to kind of know that. And so in the so we've heard a whole bunch of different numbers in the last couple of days about bandwidth, and is 10 megabits per second or 100 megabits. So one of the stats I found was between 20 and 30 megabits per second. And I kind of look, well, at home I have Comcast in Seattle here, and I have 105 megabits down and 50 megabits up. So I'm well above the average of the developed world, but it's a reasonable number. So there's going to be people that have much less than that, and people have much more. So an average of 20 to 30 kind of passes my test of does that sound reasonable. So now, as I mentioned here, the developing world is far behind, and there's a huge disparity depending on where you are. Some countries in Africa are in dial-up speed still, and other places, India, are in the 1 to 2 megabit range. So there's a huge difference in the developing world that it's kind of hard to quantify that exactly. But so then it comes down to video compression. And since we're in the kind of the video communications market, what does that mean for 4K P30 bandwidth? So 265, using video compression type content, you're looking at roughly 2 to 4 megabits per second using 265. And so that number it's quite a wide range, but it kind of gives you it's a reasonable amount. And so 264 was 50% improvement with 265. So 264, you're looking at between 4 to 8 megabits per second video conferencing type content. And that's probably, the 8 is probably a little on the high side, and the 4 is, anyways. So a fairly reasonable wide range that kind of covers a fairly large, different possibilities. And then if you look all the way back to like MPEG-4, for example, again, double the numbers and you get, 8 to 16. And if you want to get 60 frames per second, you can multiply it by 25 to 30% more to get those numbers. But that kind of gives you a general idea. So the question is, and really to answer this individual's comment, is how big is uncompressed video? And really it's very simple math here, but 4K P30, multiply the resolution of 3840 by 2160 at 30 frames per second. We'll assume the chroma is subsampled, and so you got 422 chroma, and you end up with 3.9 gigabits per second uncompressed. So we said the average developed world has 20 to 30, so we're nowhere near close doing 4K P30 uncompressed. So, well, let's go down to 720p60. What's 720p60 in uncompressed? So you get 844 megabits per second. Still nowhere close. We're several of order of magnitude above what is conceivably possible in the developed world. Okay, what about SIF? SIF's a horribly small resolution. Surely we can do SIF. I mean, this stuff's back from the 1990s. I mean, we must be at the point now where we can do SIF uncompressed. And so, well, SIF uncompressed is, there we go, is 48.6 megabits per second. So I said 20 to 30, well, this is 48. I have 105 down, so I can probably do 100. I can do SIF at home, uncompressed. So really there's no need for video compression anymore when we're talking about SIF. So now what about for the rest of the developed world that doesn't have my Comcast account? Let's try QSIF. So QSIF, I don't know if anybody even remembers QSIF, but I think it was one of the first actual resolutions that they used, and it's 3 or 4 pixels wide by, I think it's a little more than that, but 176 by 144 pixels. And so QSIF is at 12 megabits per second. So that's tiny in the whole scheme of things. I mean, that's kind of like LTE speeds. So so everybody in the developed world can do QSIF resolution uncompressed. So we've hit a point now where video compression at QSIF is totally irrelevant and unnecessary. So there we go. So in all seriousness, in conclusion, really with televisions in the home sort of living room environment, things above 4K, and I think our last speaker mentioned a lot of things around improvements in color, dynamic range and color depths and stuff like that. Those are where the value is really going to come in and kind of making it a more realistic image. The need for resolutions above 4K really starts to diminish at that point. So the other one around bandwidth is still far from being plentiful. So 20 to 30 megabits is certainly significantly better than it used to be, but still far away from what is necessary to do anything around the order of uncompressed video. And then compression, you can argue that compression is peaking at some point. I mean, we're doing 2 to 4 megabits to do 4K, again, video conferencing type content, but I mean, that's well below what most people in the developed world have, but there's still a large demand in the undeveloped, or the developing world, I think they call it now, developing world, where there's a necessity for ever greater amounts of compression. So, thank you.
Thank you. But I have actually a question. First of all, with regards to the need for bandwidth, for compression efficiency,
yeah.
There are other aspects besides the access bandwidth. So, for example, a server that is streaming video,
yeah.
right, would prefer to have much smaller files to stream, because then you will have many more the ability to serve many more customers. So, so even if you had abundant bandwidth, let's say we all had a gigabit, fiber at home, there's still an issue for, those that send it.
Yeah, I mean, certainly well overgeneralized everything. Yeah. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of other aspects, and congestion is one of them, and just the server's ability to serve that many files at that size there's limitations at that point. That's going to become the bottleneck, and I mean, yeah, absolutely.
And to throw another aspect is for reliability, meaning in addition to the available bitrate, you have the reliability question. Now, if you are able to compress more, let's say if you can reduce the size by 50%, what you could do is send the same content twice, right? In which case you would much increase the reliability of your system without increasing the bitrate. So by squeezing more of the primary information, you can then add back more that, to give you protection. So there are scenarios. Final question, and I'll just have the microphone so I can abuse it. No, I'm good. How do you define the resolve for the eye? I saw the numbers are very interesting, but what is the definition of resolving with the eye? Meaning if I change just one pixel, it's all white, and I have a black pixel and I can see that black pixel, is that type of detection?
I don't know what the definition that was used. I mean, that was the data that was used for, and there was a study on, or not a study, but a paper on where Apple came up with their number from, and that's where I based this on. And yeah, I think it was some 50. Yeah, so.
Cycle?
Cycle per degree. And cycle means like white difference.
Okay. So it's that kind of test. It's It's completely black and white. Okay. Question over there? Yes, Oliver.
Yeah. A quick comment. Akamai publishes the state of the internet, and they actually published average bandwidth speeds in different countries. Yep. It's a good report, and it's free. But I was looking at it recently, and the average speed in the US, average across the whole of the US, is 10 megabits.
Yeah, we've heard similar. I mean, it depends who you ask, and I know what I am. I don't know what everybody is, but yeah, certainly that. But that you're factoring people that are on dial-up still against people like me, and that. Again, you seem like you should filter out some of the extremes.
But Akamai is good because they serve more video to anybody else on the internet. So I think their data is pretty accurate. What's also interesting with their data is that they publish all countries as well.
Yep.
And they have historic going back to, I think, 2008. So you can see the graphs.
Yep.
China now is at 2.5 megabits. So it's where the US was about 5 years ago, and it's growing rapidly.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. Second thing I was going to say is that at 9 p.m. in the US, everyone's internet is clogged because we're all watching Netflix. And so even on your fiber connection, I very much doubt you have much more than 10, 15 megabits.
Oh yeah, there's huge variations in what I actually get. And if I go further away to servers in Texas, for example, which I use a lot, I notice the speed is significantly lower. So yeah, there's congestion all along the route. It's not, again, I've dramatically generalized this whole scenario because it just becomes too complex.
And final thing, the JCTVC is meeting right now, but they're also beginning to talk about H.266. So it's not formalized, but there are informal discussions happening as we speak.
Yeah, I'm not arguing against video compression. Now, them doing H.266 doesn't mean that it's going to be successful, but I'm not saying that we don't need video compression. I mean, this was more of a, to kind of illustrate that it's still relevant today, where uncompressed is inconceivable. So, at least at some point it will be possible, but I don't think we're there yet. So, all right, thank you.